Thompson Productions.
No way, Jose.
The following footage proves beyond any doubt that the tanks intentionally set the house on fire. It proves that the Branch Davidians were murdered. You can see that this tank has a gas jet on the front that shoots fire. You can also see the fire quite plainly. The tank goes into the house twice, and each time as it backs out, the fire at the gas jets is plainly visible.
We must all do more to recognize and look for the early warning signals that deeply troubled young people send.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to another No Way Jose. This is Jose Galison. We are bringing you part 9 of what really happened in Watergate today with Austin Picard, our perennial guest of the show, and obviously I do a regular call-in show with him as well. But, maybe we'll bring this one in for a landing today. But, at this point, I don't really need to do much introduction. It's part 9. Let's be real. If you're following along, you've been following along for a while. No one jumps in at part 9 of a series. But before we get into hopefully finishing it up today, I do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by friends over at NWJ Shave Co. If you want that superior shaving experience, then NWJ is the way to go. You can use Jose at checkout, get 10% off your entire order. This is a single blade safety razor. This is superior to the standard product you see out there, the multi-blade cartridges. It gives you a smoother shave. It's better for your skin. Who would have thought dragging less razors across your face is better for you? And as I said before, you get 10% off using Jose, and it's only the normal price is $75 for the first year. That's much cheaper compared to the multi-blades, and after that, you're just buying the razors, so even more so cheaper. On top of all that, it's a COVID mandate refusing company. This company was born refusing the COVID mandate. So buy your razor if somebody doesn't hate you. Use Jose at checkout for 10% off. NWJShaveCo.com. With that, let's go ahead and get Austin in here and get to it. What's up, buddy? How you doing?
What is up, brother?
Not much. You ready to do this, brother?
Yeah, man.
Brother.
I was just telling you privately, like, every time I go back to kind of get myself into Watergate mode, I'm reminded that you could commit your entire life to this story, like 100%. Like,
yeah.
Man, I was unaware that there's a significant footprint of George Bush Sr. as well, which I was, it makes a lot of sense concerning the fact that like Hillary Clinton was apparently inserted into the Watergate committee as far as like the investigative roles that were playing out. And her role was to essentially redact George Bush Sr.'s role in every single aspect of how he played into Watergate, which to me starts to make more sense but again, those are like excruciating details that kind of like drive home the level of corruption playing out, because this really does bring in the concept of Iran-Contra. I mean, it really does with the black bag operations that were being conducted. But as far as where we should kind of begin for part 9, I was struggling like
Let's
personally
try not to make
today.
this double digits, brother.
Right. Dude, I'm telling you. I was struggling today just trying to like remember everything that we've covered in exactly the chronological order that and it was impossible. So
So it's probably best to just refocus, maybe take a bird's eye view of this, and then kind of zoom back in where we think are the appropriate places to refocus in and bring this thing in for a landing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and really one of the best places to start, because honestly, the key element within the Watergate break-in, the botched break-in, was essentially the desk that was being targeted and prioritized was the secretary by the name of Ida Maxey Wells. It was her desk, right? And essentially, she would later was upset due to the fact that a book was written, essentially claiming in secret agenda or silent coup, actually, the removal of a president, was that she played a prominent role in setting up the hooker referral pipeline to the DNC Watergate complex through her desk as the secretary at that very moment. And also, it's interesting to point out the fact that she would later sue G. Gordon Liddy in a defamation lawsuit, and the judge would rule on behalf of G. Gordon Liddy because it very much seemed as if there was plenty of evidence proving out the fact that it was not a defamation of character in any way, and it was just proving, at least pointing to the corroborated evidence to the contrary of the official Watergate story. Which, to me, having a circuit court judge actually rule, I think it was in Baltimore, Maryland, where this took place, but his opinion, which I found very interesting, was that Ida Maxey Wells, who was a secretary at the Democratic National Committee for a short time in 1972, filed this defamation action against G. Gordon Liddy, stemming from his advocation of an alternative theory explaining the purpose of the June 17th, 1972 Watergate break-in. Now, during several public appearances, obviously, Liddy began to state that the burglars' objective during the Watergate break-in was actually to determine whether the Democrats possessed information embarrassing to John Dean, who was White House legal counsel to Nixon at the time in 1972. And so, more specifically, Liddy claims that the burglars were seeking a compromising photograph of Dean's fiancée that was located in Wells' desk among several photographs that were used to offer prostitution services to out-of-town guests. And so it's crazy to me that this judge rules that upon Liddy's motion for the summary judgment, the district court determined that Wells was an involuntary public figure who cannot prove actual malice by clear and convincing evidence, because, of course, remember, this is a lawsuit she's filing, defamation of character. And additionally, the district court determined that Louisiana law applied to all of Wells' defamation counts, and that Louisiana law would require even a private figure to prove actual malice. So on the basis of those rulings, they ruled in favor of Liddy. But here's what's interesting, because in February of 1972, we'll provide a little background for Ida Wells, because it was in February 1972. She's 23 years old at the time. She moves from her hometown of Jackson, Mississippi to D.C. and began working at the DNC. And so she's the secretary at Spencer Oliver's desk. And remember, Larry O'Brien was who G. Gordon Liddy was told was the target and the priority. So he was kept in the dark the entire time, and it was McCord's role to essentially dupe. It was McCord and John Dean who were essentially duping, and Howard Hunt, G. Gordon Liddy, who was unaware of what was actually playing out. And so, again, this is why, as he's discovering the reality of kind of how he was betrayed by this secret agenda, he begins to speak with these authors over the years after he gets out of jail, right? Because he actually one who received the longest prison sentence, although most of them, all of them were really fairly short. I think he was like 56 months or something, though. It was far longer than all of the rest. And if you remember,
I mean, what did they technically do? Was it just breaking and entering? If you really, what was it like? If you think about it, so
essentially, yeah. I mean, that's really what it technically was. But
so it's not like they lock them up for a super duper long time, anyways. So,
right?
But it's more the scandal that's the issue, obviously.
Exactly. Yeah, and John Dean, of course, being like, a key component in the cover-up that was very much leveraged and exploited by the CIA to help facilitate that cover-up within the perception. And then he was kind of made the hero of it all. and then also spent the rest of his life like on the lecturing circuit, talking about attorney ethics, right, lawyer ethics, and he had been disbarred over this, right, and had a prison sentence.
Sounds like something Durst would do after he stops practicing law.
Exactly, man. So he very quickly, cuts a deal and turned key witness, right, and was only sentenced to like 4 months. So he cashed in, wrote a book like very quickly as well, and then subsequently gave tours, which is just laughable as hell. But anyway, so he was accumulating dirt though and sexual blackmail on political, honestly, just political assets, political opponents, even just trying to see due to his level of involvement. And I'm not sure how controlled John Dean was from the outset by the CIA, because he very much clearly became entirely controlled and leveraged in order to facilitate the cover up on their behalf.
But at what point?
And was rewarded for it. But at the beginning, it was like, the level of involvement of him personally with the Columbia Plaza operation due to his, direct affiliation and relationship with Heidi Reichen, who's the madam of the service, right? Who's running the service out of the Columbia Plaza apartments a block away from the Watergate complex. She's at John Dean's wedding. She lived with his wife, Mo Biner Dean, for a time. So it's like she went with John Dean and Mo Biner Dean to Europe on vacation and just stayed with them the whole time. So it's like the fact that they're that close, and he's perfectly aware of the fact that there's compromising pictures and photographs in this desk, Ida Maxey Wells' desk in the Watergate complex, and they're also, if you consider the fact that the liaison that was set up, the intermediary that had set up the hooker referral pipeline was apparently this local attorney in DC, Phil Mackin-Bailey, we talked about before. And he inevitably gets, you remember the story of Phil Mackin-Bailey? This is so crazy, dude. So he's considered to be this foolish young attorney who's like 29 at the time. And most of his clients are, of course, prostitutes. Right. And he like thinks himself to be this, like, kind of as if he's an elite high roller in sort of a way, right? Because he's kind of at least rubbing shoulders with people that are in those circles.
This is in DC? Is this in DC?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he's in DC.
Okay,
yeah,
so probably a lot of prostitutes around there. So, but
vice cops, he's like bribing these vice investigators who are like
a slumlord lawyer kind of deal, like but like slumlord pimp lawyer type. So kind of scummy, but he's kind of like a Better Call Saul type character. Yeah,
absolutely, dude.
Yeah,
and he apparently he's got the craziest story, but he got so he was trafficking like young women across domestic borders, right? Essentially, and he was caught for interstate trafficking, and it was a very strange setup. But he inevitably had his his law office raided, and that also, of course, proved the fact that who was in his phone book: John Dean, Mo Biner Dean, and Heidi Reichen. Right, every single one of them were actually directly in contact with Phil Mackin-Bailey, who, Heidi Reichen had told him that she was being protected by the CIA, and he only knew her from an alias that she was using called Kathy Dieter, right? Which is, it's like an insane story. So he's being kind of left in the dark, but also obviously he's going to the Columbia Plaza and he's witnessing, like, he claimed to have gone to the Columbia Plaza at one point, and he had to use the bathroom. So she just tells him, or maybe Heidi wasn't there. I can't remember the details of that, but at least I think she was there, but she was just in a different room, and he needed to use the restroom. So he went looking for the bathroom, and he opened up a door, and he sees it's essentially a closet, but it's really a two-way mirror with a tripod. And you have Louis J. Russell, right, who's running security and also taping the sexual encounters of between the prostitutes and the Johns with the consent of Heidi Reichen and the prostitutes, because he's a CIA asset who's helping protect them. Which is like one of the craziest things. So he discovers this guy, and who's just running audiovisual blackmail on this Columbia Plaza apartment, prostitution network, and yeah, he basically strong arms him and tells him to forget everything he sees and get the fuck out of here. That was basically his reaction. But he described him later. Phil Mackin-Bailey describes Louis J. Russell as that very individual that he walked in on at the Columbia Plaza apartment operation. And so, by the way, that will come up later, because Louis J. Russell, he happens to be James McCord's key to the secret agenda. And I mean that in multiple ways, right? And legitimately, actually he provided the key, as well as being sort of, the window into that secret agenda and the smoking gun as well. And then, of course, yeah, it'll come full circle. But the whole point here, anyway, having gone on,
I'm spiraling, doggy. I mean, I know we talked before, so I kind of know the beats you do want to hit. I know one of the next characters you hit was Schaffler to keep you on path. Do you feel like because we kind of want to refocus bird's eye view, kind of give a larger, and I think we kind of gave a big landscape, sprawling schizo layout there somewhat. Obviously, it's hard to follow, but I mean, if you're 8 episodes deep, we've kind of already rambled this into your ears a little bit. So I think, through just like seeping in, re-saying that may have made it click again. So I think, a lot of the elements are clicking in. I think the names, there's so many names, so many different roles to keep track of. So it's almost like doing these 9 parts, I actually almost think it's better, because it's like we're getting this repetition, although it does make it kind of seem redundant. But it's like almost just to retain it, you have to be redundant, or else you're just not going to retain this information. But with that, you wanted to get to Schaffler next. That was the next character you really wanted to hit on. And then we have like another character that maybe we might touch on, and then we're coming in with, like you already mentioned, Louis J. Russell. So right. Tell me a little about Schaffler. I know he was what exactly you want to tell us about him today. I know he was the detective, played a key part in the Watergate in the Watergate investigation. So
the arresting officer as well, who was waiting outside the complex at 2 a.m. right, which is just he had a hunch. Yeah, exactly. Obviously tipped off, and there were conversations that he had with co-workers, right, other investigators in at the time in the DC Metropolitan Police Department, and essentially he had his own like sex division within as far as that he was brought up in. Little Blick Schaffler, they called him, because he had a mentor who was running really, I think he was helping facilitate the sophisticated sexual blackmail and human compromise network that was being conducted under, the guise of intelligence, hand in hand with organized crime. And this is where they would, like, at the operational level on the ground, you have to have key assets in place that have infiltrated the local, investigative divisions, police departments. And that is exactly what Carl Schaffler served, is he had basically dual loyalty with military intelligence. But, to briefly finish just that because I did have an actual point, just kind of like running a brief introduction to all of this, and I got entirely off track. But the point, though, being, because I did want to provide... Yeah, we'll get right back to Schaffler, but...
I'm just making a mental note so we both know to come back to it. We know how, as virtue of the number of episodes we have right now, we know how this narrative can get away from us. So I'm just, for both our purposes, just making a note of it here. So, all right, you did want to finish one thing on the kind of larger bird's eye view of it you were driving at. I understand the issue when you have 20 different points and you're like, damn it, I only got 19 of them.
I know. Yeah. It's maddening. But so the main issue, though, I wanted to at least provide a very brief background on Ida Maxey Wells as well, because it is it's interesting. But so Spencer Oliver, by the way, executive director of the Association of State Democratic Chairmen, and that's who she was the secretary for at the DNC complex. And so Wells continued to be employed at the DNC and under the employment of Oliver until late July of 1972. So just after the break-ins really occurred, right? And so throughout her employment, the DNC offices were located, of course, in the Watergate complex. And so a few months after Wells started her job at the DNC, Frank Wills, the security guard, noticed that piece of paper, or a piece of tape propping open the door to the DNC offices while he's making his routine rounds during the early morning hours. And so that becomes a prominent part, because as soon as he removes that tape, he comes back around for a second round and he discovers the tape is put back on the door. And that in itself is interesting, because I think McCord was obviously secretly in communication with Lewis J. Russell, which we'll get into that as well for a brief moment, because it's interesting. I think that is why he placed the tape back on the door for Lewis J. Russell to re-enter the complex after he gained a plausible alibi. It's very interesting. But so in the wake of the burglary, you have the FBI determining that Spencer Oliver's telephone conversations were being electronically monitored from a listening post located in room 723 of the Howard Johnson's Motor Inn across the street from the Watergate complex. And so because Wells often used Oliver's phone to make personal calls, some of her conversations were obviously intercepted. And so there's a drawer of Wells' desk, which was open during the break-in, which is another reason why you had investigators notice this. And you had the FBI instantly, follow up with Wells herself. So as a result, she's questioned by the FBI. There's a factual dispute between the parties over whether the FBI informed Wells of this discovery. And then the FBI also determined that obviously the key found on one of the burglars in their possession, that I believe it was Martinez, or trying to remember which one tried to swallow it, but he attempted to swallow the key while he's in being wrestled to the ground, and it was to her desk, Ida Maxey Wells' desk. And so you have in September of 72, Wells gets subpoenaed to appear as a witness before the federal grand jury investigating the break-in. And then shortly after James McCord pleads guilty, there's a letter that is written from prison, essentially stating that he had been pressured to plead guilty and to lie during the district court proceedings relating to the Watergate incident by the CIA. Right. So he says the CIA legitimately, which I think is hilarious. But it's strange, because in this letter, McCord implicates John Dean, right, the president's counsel, and John Mitchell, the attorney general, as the individuals who had been pressuring the Watergate burglars to withhold this information. So, it's obviously bringing in John Dean and John Mitchell, who are attempting to. There's an original Howard Hunt and McCord were actually going to move forward with their defense teams. We're going to move forward with the CIA defense originally before Dorothy Hunt was murdered in the plane crash, which I found very interesting. And then directly after that happened, of course, Howard Hunt just throws himself at the mercy of the court.
Just
And
weird timing. They were having marital problems, and and I mean, just an odd, convenient timing.
Right. Exactly. So as a result of these revelations by McCord, right, he implicates these high-level administration officials. This is how you subvert the CIA defense. This is how you subvert, and undermine the narrative in public perception that the CIA was in any way involved, and that it was directly tied back to the executive branch, and not the party, but the administration, right? Which was another clear and direct, priority of the secret agenda, which was to very much misdirect the public perception and also manage the narrative in the best way possible to obviously achieve a very specific outcome, which was not to implicate the CIA at any real level. And that was achieved, man, which is absolutely crazy, because, and I misspoke, because I had mentioned just a second ago that James McCord wrote that letter from prison stating that the CIA pressured him to plead guilty, but it wasn't that was not the case. It wasn't the CIA that he had mentioned. It was the White House officials. It was John Mitchell and John Dean, which makes all the sense in the world, obviously, in terms of this context, because the overall objective was clearly to undermine the CIA narrative of being involved. So yeah, that's essentially how that played out. And so, really implicating the high-level administration officials in the Nixon administration kind of became the priority very quickly. And I think that's as soon as, the key CIA assets like John Dean and McCord were very much gifted their deal by the agency. If you play ball with this narrative and officially help facilitate the cover up, then will be easy as far as like, because I think the whole point was McCord didn't want to do any real time, and so that's why at the beginning, the actual defense was going to be, hey, this was a CIA operation, and I was working covertly for this on behalf of the agency, and that was another reason why, whenever that narrative was instantly, left. Well, it was killed, honestly, by the agency. It was left dead on arrival, essentially. You know, then you instantly have McCord implicating the White House administration officials, right? And so you get the direct connection to the Nixon administration, and so I had a ultimate point that I was attempting to make, but anyway, I'll hopefully remember. Yeah, right, for sure. But yeah. Anyway, it's crazy because
okay, go ahead.
Yeah. I just think that it was, of course, in the silent coup by Lynn Kolodny and Getlin, what's his name, Robert Getlin, and they discussed this this newly found and discovered evidence regarding the break-in, as far as the purpose of the break-in, and obviously wasn't simply to replace a manufacturing listening device that had been installed in an earlier break-in at the DNC in May of '72, but also was apparently for John Dean, because he had personally authorized the Watergate break-in, the failed break-in, in order to protect his own reputation and the reputation of his now current wife, because he got married directly after the break-in was botched. He gets married to Maureen Biner, who's obviously a key and prominent relationship that she has with Heidi Reichen, the madam of the Columbia Plaza operation. And so it was in silent coup that they claimed that obviously Phil Mackin-Bailey, the attorney we mentioned before, assisted Heidi Reichen, Erica L. Heidi Reichen, assisted her in expanding her pre-existing call girl operation located at the Columbia Plaza apartments near the Watergate by promoting Reichen's services to Bailey's DNC connections. So that's where he apparently had a girlfriend named Champagne who was working in the Watergate at the time. Champagne. But so when Bailey came to visit the DNC, he asked for Spencer Oliver. But because Oliver was out of the office at the time, his secretary, Ida Maxey Wells, gave him a tour of the DNC facilities. So as a result of Bailey's contact with the DNC, there apparently one client per day was, at the very least, one client per day was being referred to Reichen from the DNC headquarters. And so the meetings with the call girls were arranged on Oliver's phone while he was out of the office. And Oliver's telephone was the target of the first May 72 break-in, during which the wiretaps were initially installed. And so that's, of course, you have Bailey eventually being arrested and indicted for violating the Mann Act and transporting underage females across state lines for immoral purposes, which apparently there were other charges as well. Extortion, blackmail, pandering, and procuring were among other charges.
It was what, the 60s? Whatever. It was a different time,
Right. So
that's
as
a joke,
a result,
everyone, to be clear.
As a result of this, the feds raid his law office, and his address books are seized. And it turns out Maureen Biner Dean, John Dean's wife, her name appeared in Bailey's address books, right? And And so then there's news of this arrest, right, that appear in this newspaper. And it's interesting because apparently,
But essentially, so this was secretary was referring out whores. That's like this is
yeah,
how, like the I think the key thing to be taken out here is clearly, given the role this chick seemed to play. I don't feel like it seems like she was kind of like a secretary, and that's like it seems like that's so how blasé it just was in there, just kind of like hit the secretary at the front, she'll get you a whore.
hmm
like that's how it kind of feels. Like, oh, hit up
right,
Jenny, or I mean, I forget what her name is. I was just saying Jenny seems like a stereotypical chick name. Oh, hit up Jenny at the front. She'll set you up. Don't worry about it. It's kind of like almost validating parking or something, you know?
right,
Yeah.
dude. I'm telling you, man. Like you begin to realize though that there was potential of this well, essentially one of the wiretap monitors named Alfred Baldwin III. He's a former FBI agent, and he has a very strange story, but it seems as if Howard Hunt believes he was a double agent who was essentially kind of leaking information to the Democrats at the time, to certain Democratic operatives, and that this was going to become basically a partisan narrative that they were going to attempt to kind of like label this essentially why they were claiming that like McGovern's offices were being targeted, which they were actually, honestly, by this very same group that were running the black bag operations. But anyway, obviously, it gets very detailed as far as when you're breaking down, Bailey's case, right? And because essentially, after his offices are raided and they discover in the phone books, and well, this article goes public about Phil Mack and Bailey's offices being raided, and in DC, this article goes public, and of course, John Dean reads it that morning, and he freaks out because he knows Phil Mack and Bailey, and he knows his wife's address book, or his wife's address is in his address book, and that there are direct connections implicating him, and so he apparently. It's crazy because John Dean calls the assistant U.S. attorney investigating the Bailey case, and he summons him to the White House. And during this meeting, he reportedly tells this assistant U.S. attorney that he thought the Democrats had leaked the prostitution ring story. And then Dean makes a photocopy of Bailey's address books and proceeded to compare the names from the book to a list of White House staff. And of course, Dean immediately recognizes his own wife's name as well as the alias of her good friend Heidi Reichen, which is in Phil's book as Kathy Dieter, right? And so, anyway, Dean obviously orders the break-in according to the silent coup narrative. He orders the break-in because he wanted to determine whether the Democrats had any information linking Maureen Biner to the Mack and Bailey, Philip Mack and Bailey, Heidi Reichen call girl operation, and whether they plan to use this blackmail and to embarrass him, or also consider the. I mean, this is a re-election campaign, right? The committee to re-elect the president. That was the whole notion behind all of this, and so. He was leveraging a lot of this sexual blackmail because he was sending a private investigator named Tony Ulasewicz to this other hooker referral pipeline called the Happy Hookers client list. You can look this up too, because he sent in like October of 1971, he sends Tony Ulasewicz, this private investigator, up to this place. 1 month later, right? He orders the first known casing of the DNC Watergate complex. So it seems like he was discovering information because apparently the Happy Hooker client list was predominantly Democrats. And so he was effectively attempting to essentially gather his own blackmail in order to defend himself, potentially to protect himself and insulate him and his wife from being exposed. That's a possibility as well. And so I'm just saying, when you're dealing with like, this is such a layered story, man. Like it's impossible to kind of come to a firm, this is exactly the reason. Now, I can very much like isolate and understand and conceptually like come to a conclusion as far as CIA involvement and definitely in terms of the cover up as well. But still, the fact of the matter is, what matters most is that the CIA was running the Columbia Plaza operation long before the Watergate break-ins ever occurred. And so this was nothing new as far as that's concerned. So we'll get a little bit more into what I actually wanted to cover. And so obviously there's so one of the more crucial facts, of course, is that the jury was asked to consider this key that I mentioned before, that one of the arresting officers took from Eugenio Martinez. And so the physical evidence obtained at the scene of the crime, apparently, of course, was it was essentially really, like, in my mind, it eluded and implicated the real true motivation and purpose of the break-in. And so that it's strange because James McCord, right, the former CIA officer who led the Cubans into the DNC, he told DNC Chairman Larry O'Brien, or he told the Senate, that it was he who was the target, right? And I think that was a huge another reason to throw off the scent to the Columbia Plaza operation, and to obviously kind of distract from any sort of prostitution scandal that could arise in terms of sexual scandals, and again, misdirect any of the investigation to not at all consider that as a potential reality. But it go anyway. There's so much that I'm thinking that's going through my mind at this moment. But
I just have
yeah,
one
so
word for you, Austin. Schaffler.
Schaffler. You're right. You're right. So yeah, Carl Schaffler is probably the best. The Watergate, honestly, according to Schaffler himself, like, and this is interesting because the FBI seems to have understood this as far as the Bureau's agents went from office to office after the arrest, trying the key on every desk until they found the one that it fit. And that, of course, was Ida Maxey Wells. And Schaffler, apparently, he took the key from Martinez. And Schaffler said photographic equipment was clamped to the top of that same desk. And so the burglars were obviously, the question became, what were they hoping to find, and and so I think that once you begin to understand, like, the role of Alfred Baldwin as well, who's eavesdropping on these conversations at the direction of James McCord, he says that a lot of these conversations explicitly intimate. Right, he's at the Howard Johnson's hotel at the time. He had been moved rooms as well, and this was all under the Gemstone files. Right, they were like recording every single conversation that was happening at this, as far as that was set up on this phone line with Ida's desk. So yeah, Baldwin, he apparently was more specific in his deposition. And according to the former FBI agent, many of the telephone conversations involved dinner arrangements with sex to follow. And while he never heard prices being discussed, Baldwin testified he guessed that 8 out of 10 people would have thought the calls involved prostitution. So this is what you're dealing with. And Baldwin himself, former FBI agent, right? He knew that for prostitution to occur, there has to be a promise of money obviously involved. And so he claims that there was no money that was actually being discussed in as far as the conversations that he heard.
This is the OG escort loophole. Like, oh, he's just paying for dinner and
Right.
and a nice night out on the town. And if I just so happen to sleep with him, I sleep with him.
Right. Exactly. And yeah, man, I'm telling you right now that it gets very strange with Carl Schaffler, because he has a criminal informant that he's basically relied on in a lot of these cases, named Robert Merritt. And again, this is a window into the homosexual underground, right? And Jim Hogan, Jim Hogan, he's the author of Secret Agenda. That's the book that he wrote, because there's 4 specific books that I always like to mention, as far as like my key reliable sources for the Watergate narrative. And that is Secret Agenda by Jim Hogan, Silent Coup by Lynn Kolodny that I referenced earlier, White House Call Girl, obviously by Phil Stanford, and then Postgate as well by John O'Connor, which I think he does phenomenal work, honestly, considering I think he has a pretty key, pretty decent grasp on who potentially could have been Deep Throat, which obviously seems as if it was a kind of a collaboration of assets, right, that were in place feeding this narrative to Woodward and Bernstein.
The original
But
Q.
yeah, exactly.
Mm.
But so yeah, this is a crazy story, and it comes in the form of Jim Hogan's reporting on Carl Schaffler and Robert Merritt, and this is the scandal that dare not speak its name, because the literally is a window into COINTELPRO as well, which was being obviously conducted at the time of hyper operational chaos. And so yeah, it was like 40 years after the Watergate arrests, the original arrests. You have this former police spy who publishes a book and makes these extraordinary claims about COINTELPRO. And so he says that it played a key role in the dismantling of the Nixon administration by a Pentagon spy ring. Obviously, we've discussed that in earlier parts, being the Maura Radford affair. And so, according to Jim Hogan, Watergate Exposed is obviously, it's the biography of this confidential informant named Robert Merritt. And it's told to one of the lawyers from the Watergate burglars. And so it may be, as far as like Jim Hogan himself, he really poetically describes this in a beautiful way, honestly, because he he claims that it's a mistake to ignore this, as much as the book itself is clearly not really, I would say, the most valuable read. You know what I mean? Like it's obviously not the best book or most well written book either. But and who knows how reliable this could be as well, because you're dealing with this criminal informant who's was a confidential informant for years and has
a book.
Yeah, exactly. But it, obviously Merritt claims to have tipped off the police in advance of the June 17th Watergate break-in. So here we get the actual criminal informant who potentially tipped off Schaffler to be there when he was outside of the Watergate complex. So to have participated with police, he also claims, and Pentagon agents in the drugging, kidnapping, and blackmailing of a senior CIA lawyer. He also claims while also having a hand in the poisoning of anti-war demonstrators. So this is what I had mentioned before, handing out poison candy to anti-war demonstrators of the Vietnam War at the time. And so this it's again, this is worth reading, honestly, because Jim Hogan he's so brilliant, and he's a poetic author. Honestly, he's one of my favorite to read. But the way that he describes this Robert Merritt criminal informant it's pretty, I just think, worthwhile. And he says the story begins in the tradition of the Bildungsroman, with the young Merritt leaving an unhappy home in West Virginia only to wash up at a Trailways bus station in the nation's capital. A good-looking kid with few, if any, moral inhibitions. It was apparently only a matter of minutes before he concluded a sex for hospitality arrangement with an employee at the bus station. With his domestic situation efficiently sorted, Merritt then went looking for more gainful employment and soon found it as a post-mortem technician in a local hospital. His job? Removing the hearts from the cadavers of children for use in a government study. The work seems not to have bothered him very much. He toiled at it for 2 years before he found what became his life's calling. In January 1970, while cruising the city's artsy DuPont Circle neighborhood, Merritt attracted the attention of an undercover police detective named Carl Schaffler. No ordinary cop, Schaffler was a born conspirator, forever setting traps for the wicked. Affable and very intelligent, he was a veteran of the Army Security Agency and its listening post at the Vent Hill Farm Station in Northern Virginia. Working closely with the National Security Agency, Vint Hill was an antenna farm whose classified mission was to intercept Soviet bloc radio transmissions as well as communications among anti-war organizations, radical groups, and left-wing think tanks headquartered in the capital. So to an undercover cop like Schaffler, whose official responsibilities shifted between vice and intelligence, Merritt was quite the prize. Here, it should be recalled that the times were virtually radioactive. 2 months before Merritt and Schaffler hooked up, more than 500,000 demonstrators braved tear gas in the streets of Washington to protest the Vietnam War. Soon afterwards, college students were gunned down by National Guardsmen on the campus of Kent State University. The anti-war movement, already white-hot, exploded. So did the Army Mathematics Research Institute at the University of Wisconsin, where a cabal of students and townies detonated a van load of ammonium nitrate fertilizer, inadvertently killing a graduate student who was working late that night. So in Washington, the Weather Underground detonated their own bomb inside the Capitol itself. Student riots became routine throughout the country, and to many people, left, right, and center, it seemed like the wheels were coming off. All of which combined to make Robert Merritt something of a find. A gay street kid with long hair and very little holdback, he can be relied upon to help Schaffler and his colleagues infiltrate, expose, disrupt, and discredit dissident groups and their leaders. That was the mandate of secret government undertakings to which Schaffler and his cohort were a part of. Illegal operations like the COINTEL program and the CIA's Operation Chaos. So, this is when he actually gets into more of the dirty details, and instead of describing more of the environment, obviously, of chaos at the time. But so in Washington, the Institute for Policy Studies was subjected to surveillance, infiltration, disruption. So were the Red House bookstore, underground newspapers like the Quicksilver Times. Even the restrooms, especially the restrooms, came under surveillance. At least the ones at DuPont Circle did. So some of this was business as usual. Washington's gay community had been of special interest to the police and the feds since the Second World War. For more than 20 years, the Washington Police Department's Lieutenant Roy Blick compiled thousands of dossiers on the city's perverts. Testifying before a Senate subcommittee in 1950, Blick described parties raided, officials high and low arrested, and ended with a real shocker. Newsweek reported there are some 5,000 homosexuals in the District of Columbia, he testified, and 3,750 of them work for the government. That's what he said, which is just crazy to even say this. I believe it. Right. So he says that of particular interest were people of influence, wayward lawyers and politicians, judges, businessmen and their families. Male and female prostitutes and their clients were also targeted, and the results shared with both the FBI and the security research staff at the CIA. The dossiers were sometimes put to political use, and that was undeniable, apparently. Their compilation justified on the grounds that homosexuals were a national security threat, which is interesting because of how prominent the homosexual underground was in terms of, a lot of the intelligence apparatus playing out with the domestic smuggling operations in upstate New York, where that huge scandalous beatdown in the streets where the homosexuals were warring with the police outside of a gay club. I can't remember the name of it, but it's very famous. And Detective Jim Rothstein claimed that location was key and prominent as far as child prostitution and child trafficking was concerned, and that a lot of that abuse, was cultivated in the kind of facilitated through the homosexual hangouts at the time. And so it was just in no way, I think apparently that was misrepresented as far as it being they're targeting homosexuals because they're gay, when which some obviously happened, but you know what I mean. But still, it's very interesting to say the least, right? That it seems to have been a priority target in kind of being utilized and exploited and leveraged to the benefit of the intelligence apparatus running domestic covert operations. And that's where you have like apparently Schaffler becoming Blick's protege during the 1960s, right? So this dual intelligence, military intelligence, Karl Schaffler now becomes the protege of this individual, and and so man, it's crazy because they have apparently people within the department starting referring to him as Little Blick, right? As I said earlier, Little Blick Schaffler, but he apparently inherited a lot of those files when um, Blick retired, right? And so this is when he became a regular liaison with his FBI and CIA counterparts because he essentially took over this sex division of the local metropolitan police department, and not just apparently, if we can believe Robert Merritt, Schaffler was also in touch with White House counsel John Dean. So it's very likely that he's key, the key reason why, obviously, he was tipped off to actually be at the Watergate complex. So this, of course, should give all of us pause. And so there are, I mean, the secondary break-in, right, which was entirely a botched break-in, that was effectively ordered by John Dean, and it was due to, Phil McInbailey's law offices being raided, as I mentioned, and that going public, and he wanted to actually see what dirt was potentially in the desk of Ida Maxey Wells and if it implicated him personally. And so Dean was meeting with this police officer who would eventually make the Watergate arrest. That's what we have to understand. And so uh, this is an interesting place we find ourselves because, as Merritt claims, he accompanied Schaffler to a soiree at the Old Stein restaurant in April of 1972. This is 2 months before the Watergate break-ins. And according to Merritt, those in attendance included John Dean and a tumbler of military brass. So elsewhere, Merritt claims that he first met Dean before an anti-war demonstration in the Capitol. He'd met up with Schaffler, who was on his way to a meeting with a man the detective would only identify as J.D. So obviously that could be John
Vance.
Dean.
Oh,
Right,
my
J.D.,
bad.
right. So an anti-war demonstration was in the apparently in the so J.D., right, John Dean, whom Merritt later recognized as John Dean, was seated in a parked car near DuPont Circle during this anti-war demonstration. This is where he was meeting with him. So Merritt says he didn't give the introduction much thought at the time, but until obviously later on when he discovered who John Dean actually was. And so it becomes, the question becomes why Schaffler would even bring Merritt to a meeting like that. You know what I mean? It's like that's a little strange, but I mean, who knows? It's not entirely certain the relationship they had. But still, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that Schaffler would have introduced Merritt to John Dean, and Schaffler at the time was the liaison as far as between Dean and the local police, and also just the secret agenda playing out with the CIA involvements as well. And so anyway, the anti-war demonstration, they're a part of Dean's brief at the White House, and that's also, if you remember, one of the key reasons why he caught Nixon's attention was because he was very harsh on his crackdown of anti-war demonstrators at the time. He was a young attorney, and anyway, it's definitely strange. But Merritt and Douglas Caddy, right? If you remember, Douglas Caddy is a dude that was a personal friend of Howard Hunt, worked at the the Mullen and Company, which was a CIA cutout, had a lucrative CIA cover contract.
Yep.
And he was the original attorney for the first seven, the original seven, before he was replaced instantly. And he has very strange connections. He I had mentioned before, he worked alongside Guy Bannister and at 544 Camp Street. And and knew all of the usual suspects who were directly involved with the assassination of JFK. And so he also apparently he knew Robert Merritt, this criminal informant for Carl Schaffler, who's the arresting officer at the Watergate. And so Douglas Caddy apparently was in regular contact with Robert Merritt, right, for years. And apparently the book is Robert Merritt's story as told to Douglas Caddy. That's how this is basically arranged. And so Douglas Caddy added a very interesting prologue as well, and an afterword to this book. And so Caddy has an issue with the book now in hindsight, which is hilarious. And so he claims that some of these allegations are outrageous, and so they only came out when Merritt began to publicize the book, apparently, according to Caddy, as far as some of the more extraordinary claims, where so you have, I don't know, he's claiming that he's just an informant, and he's kind of like comparing him to kind of a chaos agent that's attempting to really disrupt the narrative. But considering who Douglas Caddy is, and who, you know, his close relationships and historical background ties into, yeah, I don't know how much we can rely on Douglas Caddy's personal opinion,
little strongly biased,
right? And he's claiming that Robert Merritt intentionally embellished this story, right? And so but anyway, obviously we know that he worked for the Mullen and Company, and which was the Washington-based PR firm that served with the CIA cover, right, and looked after Howard Hughes' interests in the Capitol as well, which is very convenient at this time. And so after the Watergate arrests, Hunt obviously got a hold of Caddy and urged him to represent the burglars at their arraignment. And because Caddy's new clients were these mystery men with fake IDs, these Cubans who are like, "Who are you, dude?" Like they didn't even know what was going on at the time, and refused to answer questions. And so anyway, so the court brought pressure upon Caddy himself, and he was subpoenaed to appear before a grand jury. And Caddy at first refused to answer any questions about how he had come to be involved in the case. He invoked attorney-client privilege, but then Maximum Judge John Sirica promptly cited the lawyer for contempt. And so he's confronted with jail time. Caddy relents, and he clearly is forced to testify as a witness against his own clients. But yeah, it was interesting, the role that Douglas Caddy inevitably played here. But Robert Merritt's story brings Douglas Caddy even deeper into the Watergate story here, because according to this confidential informant, Officer Carl Schaffler apparently attempted, and his cohorts as well, apparently these military brass and John Dean, and right, this cabal that he's legitimately loyal to at this moment, they apparently tried to seduce the lawyer, right? That's what so Schaffler wants Merritt to seduce the lawyer. And this was an allegation that Merritt made years later. And he claims that essentially Caddy was in fact secretly gay and had gone to great lengths to conceal it. And Caddy later on, it was acknowledged that Caddy is a homosexual.
I like to think he was like super flaming.
yeah, it's strange because at the time, obviously, it's, you know, and so he very much was a conservative as well. And so, you know, but guess what? Guy Bannister, David Ferry, they're all gay as well. Why, you know, and that was very strange. Yeah. And they're running these, you know, he was running a conservative committee in New Orleans, is what
Jack
Douglas
Parsons
Caddy was
around doing gay stuff, a little Fruit Loop. Like,
absolutely. So it's interesting because Schaffler apparently knew of Caddy's homosexuality, and Schaffler, being known as Little Blick, right, and was apparently had a relationship with Jack Anderson as well. And Jack Anderson was covering a lot of this. The reporter who Howard Hunt was considering on poisoning, right? And because he was providing bad press on this network of spooks, and so Jack Anderson referred to Little Blick Carl Schaffler as the CIA sex squad. That's what he was running, and as well as basement operations at the FBI and NYPD intelligence, and Caddy's name appeared in one or more of these perverted files. Yeah, and so again, you have more connections here of apparently Caddy being as far as exposed as having homosexual proclivities, obviously, by these individuals, and Carl Schaffler himself was keeping these what were called perverted files that were only available to him, which he was clearly, I would imagine, they were being used for this intelligence operation for sexual
porn.
Yeah, but obviously, in Watergate Exposed, Robert Merritt, this criminal informant, tells a story that it wasn't just Caddy's seduction that they were attempting to force him to apparently pursue, but Schaffler and his cabal of spooks, apparently a lot of other fellow cops as well, and then other investigators, FBI agents, and yeah, Pentagon spooks. They wanted him to actually assassinate Douglas Caddy. And so they offered him $10,000 and later apparently even raised the amount up to $100,000 to carry out the assignment. And Merritt claims he refused, apparently on ethical grounds. But what is interesting is that Merritt, he essentially, he explains that, right, the interesting manipulation being conducted by the police handlers, right? It was very much like in the Caddy story. Merritt attempts to explain the motivations of Schaffler and these Pentagon spooks, and essentially it's kind of a layered operation, right? There are layered objectives playing out, and but they definitely wanted to know how Caddy had come to represent the burglars, apparently. And for some reason, they were attempting to disrupt the original defense. And this it's a very strange story and how it played out. And another reason why I wonder why Howard Hunt freaked out and called Douglas Caddy directly after the break-in happened and was botched and the arrest took place. He ran to the Howard Johnson's motel where the taping operation was being conducted, and you had the wiretap monitors like Alfred Baldwin III at the Howard Johnson's motel. He went over there and he immediately called Douglas Caddy. And Alfred Baldwin claims that he was a witness to this conversation over the phone that Howard Hunt had with Caddy, where he says, basically, he tells him what happened. He tells him to meet him at his place right at this specific time, right? And so, and then he yells at Alfred Baldwin to essentially take all of the evidence of the files that they had that they called the gemstone file, which were all the transcripts of the conversations that they were wiretapping and listening to, obviously. And he said, just get rid of them. Obviously, he didn't care if he drove the van into a river. And so that was obviously very interesting how that played out. But to me personally, it's like, I wonder, just as far as the involvement of Howard Hunt, I feel like he was kept in the dark by McCord in more ways than one. Even though he was highly involved in the secret agenda, he wasn't entirely read in on each and every aspect of it. And therefore, he was kind of hung out to dry for a time, and until obviously they leveraged his wife against them. I think that he was forced to bend the knee, essentially, because I'm not sure how much he was willing to follow through. He was pursuing the CIA defense beforehand, so I'm not so sure if he was as willing to play ball right at the beginning stages of this scandal. So again, it's like there's so much to this, just to attempt to try and like suss out for yourself, right? But we'll finish this part right here so we can move on. I just thought I wanted to at least get to the hilarious point where Robert Merritt, this criminal informant, was given his instructions on how he should actually attempt to assassinate Douglas Caddy. And so
Oh, this is
apparently,
the gay poisoning,
yeah,
isn't it?
bro.
Yeah, I think we already talked about this in one of the
I had
episodes.
mentioned it in
Or
passing for
mentioned it,
sure.
yeah. I
Yeah.
swear, yeah. It's like he literally was supposed to put like essentially suppository in his peen and
100%.
essentially put it in his butt. And that's
It's
it was really
crazy.
that simple, yeah.
So there were obviously political reasons for this targeted assassination, and Caddy allegedly knew too much about the CIA involvement, and that, by the way, there apparently the wiretapping, um, the wiretapping technology that was being provided by oh shit, I have his name here, and I'll refer to it in a moment, because it's very interesting, because it's far more sophisticated than I originally understood. Right, I think it actually tapped into a satellite network, a CIA satellite network, which I didn't realize that was even a part of this, but apparently it was highly sophisticated at the time, more so than I was aware of or could even like quite understand, just looking from the outside in, obviously. But yeah, so Caddy knows too much, and he's a communist, pro-Cuban, and a leader of the Young Americans for Freedom, obviously. And but he was not a communist in my mind at the time. But it's very, I don't know. I think he was far more conservative than this Robert Merritt's story is actually presenting here. But as obviously, this is where we get into the hilarious moment where Robert Merritt provides the description of the assignment, and he claims that I was supposed to insert a gelatin-like suppository into his rectum, which would have caused Caddy's death within minutes. Death by suppository. That was legitimately the goal there. So, yeah, I just think that part alone is absolutely hilarious.
yeah,
And
it's a
also,
unique assassination method for sure.
oh, no doubt, man. But yeah, I don't know. It's just the fact that he's being tipped off, and you can clearly understand that this man is according to, as I mentioned, Jack Anderson, who's seemingly a legitimate reporter, very credible, and done phenomenal work throughout his career. Um, you know, Carl Schaffler was running the CIA sex squad as a part of the Metropolitan DC Police Department, and was no doubt. I mean, we already know he had loyalties to military intelligence, but that right there, that connection, if that is true, if Robert Merritt can be relied upon, which how can it's always difficult
Yeah, who knows?
hinge any sort of conclusion
Off
on
one dude said a thing. That's
on
why it's
one
always
guy.
looking for corroborations.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it does fit perfectly within the this pattern that we've been kind of
Same
spotlighting.
thing as like was it Dave Paul Hammer or the fucking McVeigh's fucking death row buddy that he supposedly admitted all to, but he was also a known con man. So you're like, I don't fucking know. So it's like could fit. But I think, Brad, it might be time for us to bring this sucker in for landing. I think we have one more character that we wanted to really highlight. We did mention him in passing. He's one of the few glowies that we haven't really mentioned too much, but he is kind of a good little figure to kind of tie this thing off with, and that is Lewis J. Russell. So you want to tell me about him and what do you feel like we should know before we walk away from this Watergate playlist and never look back?
I know, right? Honestly, it's time. I'm very tired. As much as it's like I would legitimately have to prioritize Watergate as like my thing if we were actually going to get to the bottom of it. It's really what it is. And as much as I think that what matters the most is clearly the CIA involvement aspect of all of it, and the silent coup, the secret agenda.
There's
and
triple crosses, double crosses, quadruple crosses.
Right.
God, I'm like lisping crosses. But you know what I mean? It just that is but like knowing what actually happened is hard. You are right. There's so much espionage at work here, but that's kind of the point. It's just knowing. You almost can't know exactly, but at least you can know that like, hey, a lot of shit went down here, and clearly people were scurrying and freaking out about some stuff.
100%. And Lewis Russell, he had a very interesting relationship between obviously the call girl operation and the really, he's a former FBI agent, right? And had become the chief investigator for the House Committee on Un-American Activities. And that was in the early 1950s. But it's far more interesting as far as his connections are concerned, because once you first of all understand that the bugs in the DNC offices being monitored in the Howard Johnson by Alfred Baldwin, the ex-FBI man, just like Lewis J. Russell, whose name McCord had picked out of the roster of the Society of Former Special Agents of the FBI. That was how. So McCord, again, keep in mind, McCord hired Lewis J. Russell, former FBI. He also hired Alfred Baldwin, the wiretap monitor that was hanging out at the Howard Johnson motel, and he allegedly hired him based on, like I just mentioned, based on this roster that you can apparently choose from that involves the Society of Former Special Agents of the FBI. And so that's where he chose Alfred Baldwin from. And so McCord, ordinarily now employed by the Nixon campaign, obviously, would not have accompanied the visitors, but he went along to turn up the volume on his transmitters. The team was busily snapping photos of documents when a security guard noticed the tape on the door locks and called the police. But here's something that I wanted to mention, and this is from Warren Hinkle and William Turner, and it's Deadly Secrets, the CIA Mafia War Against Castro and the Assassination of JFK. And there's just a brief aside. It says Frank Sturgis, one of the burglars, Op 40 guys. Sturgis recalls that he had hardly been booked at the police station when an attorney by the name of Douglas Caddy arrived and told him, quote, "Olympus is watching over you." Dude, all I thought was Committee of 300. They called themselves the Olympians, man. That's the Royal Institute for International Affairs. My mind just went straight to that, because I'd never heard this before until legitimately earlier today. I discovered this portion where Douglas Caddy allegedly said this to Frank Sturgis, and Frank Sturgis, he still claims that the break-in wasn't just for, the sexual blackmail of the prostitution network at the Columbia Plaza, but also for a pedophile black book, right? That was essentially going to expose, this underage prostitution network that was being utilized as well out of the DNC. And so that was always interesting to me, because he was the assassin that was sent to, he was the hitman sent to assassinate Marita Lorenz, right? And he tells Detective Rothstein all of that. Like, yeah, no, it was a pedophile book as well. And it was a log of pedophiles who were compromised political assets. So that, he's not the only one who said that either, which is, that's fascinating to me at the very least. But anyway, I forget.
We were on Lewis J. Russell. Is there anything else you had on him you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, I forgot. There was one thing that he did say, but it really doesn't matter. It's too much to remember. But so anyway, Olympus is watching over you. How crazy is that statement? And
that is weird.
Yeah.
It made me think of they use the Hermes network too, or whatever too.
Right.
Like, so obviously, yeah, there's a, that's a pedophile type insignia, I think, sometimes, or symbol is Hermes as well. So Olympians, gods, I just did something with Jules where we kind of dug into the Setian philosophy, or if you want to call it that. It is kind of the idea of elevating oneself to gods, and they can kind of do whatever they want type deal, because they're, the supreme individuals. Right. So obviously, if you apply a dark flair to that, that can get wild. I mean, I explained in that episode, 100%. I'm quite the individualist. I just think I think that's not the path to a fulfilled life.
Right.
So I think they try to fool you that, you're going to be a super individual and you can just live for pleasure. And you're like, no, that's just short-term gain. And you're like, it's not really, you're going to be chasing fleeting feelings. So
yeah. Absolutely, man. And so just to finish this off, because I did mention, though, that Howard Hunt, he testified before the U.S. Senate Watergate Committee in 1973, and he claimed that he suspected Baldwin of being a double agent with Democratic ties who betrayed the Watergate operation. And I found that interesting because Baldwin was the wiretap monitor hired by McCord, the former FBI agent, who told his story to a lawyer, to a friend and a classmate at law school, apparently named Robert Myrto. And this information was eventually passed on, and a strong supporter of the Democratic Party, that was essentially by the name of John Casadento, this political operative for the Democratic Party. And so this all happened very quickly. Apparently Baldwin started running his mouth to political operatives, and he didn't tell the authorities at all, but he did pass the information on to Larry O'Brien, it was apparently G. Gordon Liddy was under the impression it was his desk that was the priority target, which wasn't actually true. But that's what would actually bring in the misconception of, oh, this was an operation to target the Democrats for re-election. That's what that was about, right? And so the Democrats now knew that people like E. Howard Hunt and Gordon Liddy were involved in the Watergate break-in. So there you go. They get hung out to dry by Alfred Baldwin III. You wonder why Hunt says he's a double agent who's working on behalf of the Democrats to essentially, what did he say? Betray the Watergate operation. That's very interesting to say under testimony, and so. Yeah, apparently by checking through the records of phone calls made from the listening post from Alfred Baldwin, the FBI easily located him. Obviously, it was very quickly this former FBI agent who kept logs of the wiretaps for the conspirators and acted as a lookout on the very night of the break-in. So Baldwin agreed to cooperate instantly in order to avoid the grand jury looking into the case at any level. And because he was meant to provide the right another part of the lie
from every angle. You have it from every angle. You control it from the beginning. You can control it to the end, and it's kind of
that is so ingenious. Crazy to me, honestly, man. Because then he even gives an account that was ran, I believe, in the Times, and it was basically the first account in which the public learned details of the break-in, including that the one in June, in which the burglars were caught, was their second visit to the offices of the DNC. So that as well, that really mattered. I felt like, and we will skip Tony Ulasewicz. I think it's just too much to cover.
Yeah.
And it's a whole nother wrinkle of the Chappaquiddick incident, and a woman being alive for hours in the car somehow while it's submerged in water. I don't know. It's a crazy story.
Well, I think we did it. I think we left with almost as much questions as you guys started out with, but probably different questions. So I think that's kind of the point, I think, of the Watergate story, is just to come away and go, what the fuck?
I'll end it with this final thing on Louis J. Russell, because this will bring at least a little bit more of a conclusion, like a conclusive. I don't know.
Closure. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll bring a little more closure to
narrative.
This
a narrative end. I don't know.
Yeah, something, because honestly, I just feel like we need to, at the very least, present a smoking gun of some kind. And I think that the sixth burglar is that smoking gun. And that is what Louis J. Russell really offers is this revisionist narrative, is because he also has an extremely suspicious death. And in my mind, Louis J. Russell is proof positive that the Columbia Plaza operation had long been in full swing, with CIA protection for long before the break-ins ever occurred. And so Russell had worked for, and by the way, he was the one who was outed by Phil McInbailey as running security at the Columbia Plaza operation, who's in the closet, tells him to forget everything he sees. He's actually the one who's taping the Johns. So he'd worked for General Security Services for less than a year, ending in April of 1972, just before the break-ins occurred. So his resignation happened to occur right before the official first Watergate break-in.
Didn't Oswald get hired at the book depository like a month or two prior or something like that?
This is the playbook. This is what they do. Yeah. It's the same group of spooks. Like, why would they not be utilizing the exact same covert clandestine playbook that it's all they know? This is the standard rules of engagement and operation domestically at the time. They're running their plausible deniability cutouts. They're retiring for the third time. Whatever the case, that it's like it all is exactly the same. You could honestly run it parallel too. You wonder why this was the same group who conducted all the assassinations and really was the cleanup crew that kind of tied off all the loose ends. I honestly, man, understanding this part of it as well, that his resignation occurred just before the first break-in and right after Jeb Magruder claims he was given the green light, right, as far as to order the break-ins in the first place, to start the break-ins. And so Louis J. Russell's hired by James McCord. And James McCord hires him at McCord and Associates to work on behalf of the CRP, the Committee to Re-elect the President. Now, strangely enough, it turns out that as a part of Russell's duties while employed at GSS for less than a year was to act as a security guard for the Watergate office building. So,
just a little side duty, just for just a little bit,
Now, this seems to be exactly how they were able to procure the key to the DNC offices in the first place. And Lou Russell, considered to be the sixth burglar. Here's another crazy point. The Washington Post, before they were entirely compromised, right, by the Woodward and Bernstein affair, essentially you have this initial reporting that's conducted, and basically just before the official narrative, the false narrative takes shape. And you have these initial reports from June 20th of 72 published that the police were actively investigating a sixth perpetrator. It says, quote, police sources say they are still looking for a sixth person believed to have been involved in this incident. There was never a follow-up report by the Post on the sixth burglar. And it was Lou Russell's, basically what we need to understand is that it was Lou Russell's security keys from from his short time employment at GSS that allowed McCord to move freely throughout the Watergate complex. And then you also have to consider that it's important to point out that prior to the Watergate burglary, Louis Russell had been telling several different people that he had been taping prostitutes and their johns with the apparent cooperation of the prostitutes. And this obviously clearly corroborates attorney Phil McInbailey's claims of observing Russell running security at the Columbia Plaza Madam's apartment. And this also directly ties in McCord and the CIA, because McCord hired him from McCord and Associates to the Columbia Plaza operation prior to any break-in at the Watergate. And Russell's involvement as the sixth burglar, only known to McCord, proves not only CIA involvement, but also that the surveillance and the wiretapping, by the way, was directly targeting the prostitution phone lines. And unbeknownst to the other burglars, McCord was under deep cover, right? He's acting on behalf of Helms and the agency. I think that's another reason why he had that strange quote, deep appreciation, with deep underlined twice, that was directly sent from, it was like in McCord's office. He from Helms directly. And so Liddy described McCord the night of the burglary. He described him as the shadow the night of the botched break-in, because he would just they couldn't even find him. He'd be gone, moving up and down different floors. They were like, where's McCord? He tells them to turn off their walkies. So they had no communication when the break-in was botched and the arrests were being conducted. And Carl Schaffler and his agents are running up the stairs. Nobody, Alfred Baldwin was supposed to be able to communicate to them, to tell them, hey, the feds are coming. You know what I mean? That didn't take place whatsoever. And so this is crazy to me, because you're again dealing with, obviously, Louis J. Russell, long been taping and protecting the Columbia Plaza prostitution operation covertly on behalf of the CIA. And this is where you have to consider, clearly, it's important to remember, based on the White House call girl, Kathy Dieter frequently used the alias of Heidi Reichen, right? Kathy Dieter was the frequently used alias for Heidi Reichen, who obviously was the madam running the Columbia Plaza operation. But there's a statement, right, to attorney and intermediary Phil Bailey that I had mentioned about her claiming that she had been protected by the CIA. And John O'Connor, the attorney and author of the book Postgate, he says Russell's involvement with the break-in came to the attention of the FBI very early on in the investigation. His initial FBI interview, Russell stated to agents that he ate at the Howard Johnson's restaurant the night before the burglary and had visited the Watergate area that night only because he was nostalgic for an old girlfriend who was apparently a prostitute who used a hairdresser in the area. Now, in his interview with the FBI later on October 10th, 1972, he admitted that he had eaten at the Hojo on the night of the burglary at the restaurant, but continued to deny that he had entered the office building that night. Now, after it became obvious that the FBI agents did not buy this story, Russell tells them to fuck off. And then this guy sounds crazy. He's like a drunk too. Like every way that he's been described, he's like basically a loose cannon. And the CIA was a little concerned that he was going to run off at the mouth, but they were protecting him at the beginning. And so on October 11th, 1972, Patrick Collins, a young reporter from the Washington Star News, writes a blockbuster article about Lou Russell. And this individual Collins, this reporter, quickly links Russell as the person referred to as the sixth burglar, and also with key revelations claiming that Russell's post-arrest living situation was something that we needed to very much be aware of, and that was that Louis Russell conveniently goes from a $15 a week room on this like shitty area on Q Street to living with a prostitute in a high luxury apartment in Silver Springs, Maryland. Now, it's also revealed that his benefactor, right, happened to be a CIA-connected stockbroker by the name of William Byerly, who would often take him out for expensive meals. Now, John O'Connor, he suggests that this points to the CIA actively pursuing a cover-up of the sixth burglar, and that this secret agenda, by as far as facilitating the cover-up of the secret agenda as well, and the CIA involvement by prioritizing Russell's silence. So things were apparently getting very hot for Russell whenever the Watergate Committee Minority Counsel Fred Thompson, assistant to Senator Howard Baker of Tennessee, quickly apparently became a TV star after all of this as well, which it goes with the territory with these political scandals. And he issues a subpoena to Russell, to Louis J. Russell, on May 9th of 73, seeking Russell's phone and banking records in advance of the hearings. So Russell replied on May 11th that he didn't have any. He didn't have any bank or phone records. So according to O'Connor, this was perhaps true since Russell did not maintain a bank account, and he essentially used CIA liaisons to provide him with his funding, right? That was basically how he was just a spook. Yeah. And so this is crazy because apparently, the minority counsel obviously were willing to follow up after he claims that he has no bank account or phone records. And the CIA, they were becoming very concerned about his coming testimony, right? Because he was set to testify. And Russell had recently been confiding to individuals around him that he planned to write a tell-all, right? On the Watergate specifically. But he makes the mistake of telling these individuals with wider connections to the intelligence community and likely included his own prostitute girlfriend.
Did he die? Did he die?
We're getting there. We're getting there.
I'm being silly, obviously.
So
no way. I never would have guessed it by the point of this story that we're at.
So, as McCord's right-hand man, Louis J. Russell, in May, already would have obviously known of the CIA's involvement and Michael Stevens' role in the burglary operations, because Michael Stevens is the one who provided the wiretapping technology to McCord himself. And he Louis J. Russell most likely was aware of the satellite linking bugs McCord had on order, which would have given away a broader CIA prostitute taping program that was not supposed to come to light. And Russell's loose lips would likely have spurred this attention as far as the CIA connection to Michael Stevens, right? And it's interesting because obviously Michael Stevens received threatening phone calls, right, that he reported about in May of 73. And he was Michael Stevens of Stevens Research Laboratories, who sold the bugging devices to James McCord that were discovered during the break-in at the Watergate complex. And he was also the individual who reported to the FBI that Dorothy Hunt was actually flying to Chicago to see him in order to ensure his silence with a cash payment. He also told the FBI that just after the plane crash, he received threatening phone calls from persons unknown who claimed that Dorothy Hunt's death was a homicide and that he would be next in line if he ever talked. On May 18th, 1973, one day after the apparent warnings from Deep Throat, while he's meeting with fucking Woodward and Bernstein, Russell falls violently ill. All right. And he claims that someone had switched his
butt.
brother. He says that someone switched his heart medicine with poison. He died shortly thereafter from a compromised cardiac system. And also his own daughter claimed that he had been telling her that he was being poisoned and that he was going to be murdered. And she came forward with that claim as well. But obviously, this ties directly into Howard Hunt taking G. Gordon Liddy to a meeting with this CIA poisons doctor named Howard Gunn, where they discussed these potential ways of disabling and assassinating and targeting Jack Anderson, the American journalist. And one of those methods, obviously, was aspirin roulette, which was apparently a strategy of using a poison pill that would be substituted for aspirin in the aspirin bottle, and sooner or later the victim would have to swallow it. So that was basically the strategic approach here. And so
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm basically there, but there's one other thing. It's crazy because obviously there are accounting records that seem to expose more as well, that he wasn't only being paid by McCord and Associates at the time. It was later revealed that, and this is through examinations of White House accounting records, that Lou Russell was also potentially being paid by John Dean, with lawyers exposing seemingly corresponding financial transactions between Dean and Russell. And this is interesting as well because this is after the break-in, with the implication being hush money payments linked to unacknowledged withdrawals from the White House safe, with H.R. Bob Haldeman claiming Dean was the culprit. And that makes all the sense in the world because John Dean was also implicated by Howard Hunt. He says John Dean, and I think Magruder as well, said that Dean destroyed the Hermes notebooks of Howard Hunt that were in the White House safe. And that would have unequivocally proven CIA involvement because Howard Hunt was keeping an operational, essentially an operational diary. That is what the Hermes notebook was. And you would only do such a thing if you are under deep cover in a covert operation. That is the typical status quo, mode of operation. It's basically what you do as an intelligence operative in the field. And so the DNC wiretapping, this is really what we need to remember, is that the DNC wiretapping would have monitored the call girl operation Louis J. Russell had been taping on behalf of the CIA while providing protection for the Madam Heidi Reichen, which also corroborates the claims that she was actively being protected by the agency. So all of that, perfectly reinforces, what we've been discussing this entire time. And so also it should also explain the continuing tapes of the locks after all the burglars had entered, because clearly, this would allow Louis J. Russell to re-enter the building. And, and so that makes more sense why McCord would have gone missing while he's in communication with his own personal operative, right, who's been running at least the security for the Columbia operation, and had been obviously taping the Johns and the prostitutes, but also working for McCord and Associates along the way, procuring the keys for the Watergate DNC complex, and then providing those keys for entry to McCord himself. And so it also explains McCord's delay in pronouncing the DNC office as clear while waiting for Russell's return from Benedict, Maryland. He went to visit his daughter, and that was really just a plausible deniability as far as in terms of a strategy to gain an alibi, right? This is really what it became, because it would also, basically McCord's presence on the team and he was just frequently absent, right, on the night of the burglary, and basically claimed that he feared that the documents being revealed, right, or transmitted to Dean and others without curation would involve far too much about the CIA's active programs that they were running domestically. And so Russell's death, of course, and this part is this is kind of the theory of John O'Connor, which I think is very valuable. And he claims, right, that essentially Russell's death begs the question: if the Watergate burglaries were solely a Nixon administration project, would there have been any need to poison Lou Russell? Would there have been any need for his presence during the burglary? His death certificate then should be Exhibit A in the case against the CIA. If the Watergate burglaries were solely a Nixon administration project, then there would have been no reason for Russell to have been lurking as the sixth burglar. So the October 11th, 1972 Washington Star News article about Russell should be Exhibit B in that same case against the CIA, documenting Russell's admission that he was in the vicinity of the Watergate office building on the night of the burglary. Russell's participation provides strong evidence proving CIA covert involvement in the burglary, combined with Michael Stevens' admission that he was selling bugs to McCord set to link to a CIA satellite. So I think that it really starts to become just undeniable, right? That one, Louis J. Russell was the sixth burglar, right? Two, there was a deep nexus involved in DC at the time that was very much prioritizing human compromise. And, honestly, when you realize that even his own daughter, as I said, Louis J. Russell, no autopsy, right? Acute coronary occlusion is what it was described as. And Russell's claim that he had been poisoned was made to his daughter shortly before his death. So that's essentially what occurred there.
We did it, brother. We did it.
We did it, bro.
With that, you want to let my audience know where they can find you, and we'll get out of here. Sorry if you caught me yawning. I only got like 3 hours of sleep last night. I was just like, whoa, oh no. It just hit me all of a sudden. My second wind went away.
Right. But I'm exhausted too, honestly.
But I appreciate you coming on. We're going to be doing another one here very soon. Another episode, another Watergate, but another Waco and then Dutro. But with that, let my audience know where they can find you, and we'll go on and get out of here, buddy.
All right. I feel like I did the best I could to try and kind of conceptually come to a decent conclusion for the Part 9 series of Watergate, if we aren't going to continue to inevitably pursue this research for the rest of our lives. Then, I think that we kind of introduced all the key prominent suspects that are worthy of note, that clearly provide an alternative theory that's far more plausible. So hopefully it's somewhat as far as palatable. I hope to at least some degree it is, but either way, I did my best, and we made some extraordinary claims at the very least tonight, and some very interesting connections. But yeah, you guys already know the Underclass podcast. best place to support me, patreon.com/theunderclasspodcast. And yeah, follow me on Twitter at TheaterThugAWP. That's basically it, brother.
Yeah, Theater RE, the classical spelling. But yeah, if you guys want to support what I'm doing over here, like, share, subscribe, comment, leave a 5-star review on iTunes, Spotify, goes a long way. You can also follow me on Twitter at TarragingJose. Especially if you like the morning show, a good thing you can do is if you're on Twitter, tag me in stuff that you think is interesting, and I'll very likely cover it on the show. But at the Patreon, if you do want to directly support the show, the best way to do that is Patreon. I mean, let's be real. I mean, cash is king. So send it directly my way if you can afford it. If not, it's cool. But the lowest level is $2. The highest level is $20. The lowest level, you get access to episodes like this early. I do about 2 a week usually. I'm about have 4 at a time behind the paywall typically. So they sit behind there for a couple weeks. So you get a good value out of that. You also get what the hell was I gonna say? You get ad-free RSS feed. You also get the video chat priority on Already Dead, or call-in priority, which is me and Austin's weekly call-in show on Tuesdays at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. Also, I give a big shout-out to my sponsors every time. This is the highest level of my Patreon, but I just give them a big shout-out because just tell them I love them. And thank you for the support. I got my co-host on Tower Gang at Tower Gang Toad, also at Abrogate D's at ZOVRACK at _Infazil, Tim Tuttle at Jolly Island Cleeble, Will Bell's Delicious Blueberry Rabbit Eye Wine, big fan of Show Torment, and at INWARDLOVER. And with that, we're going to get out of here. We are out. Bye-bye.